I'm not a big fan of GDP growth and all that shit. That's the kind of stuff capitalists use. They say, "Oh my God, look at the GDP growth! Look at this." No, how is the working class doing?
Yeah.
Are people able to start a family? Or do people have a good work-life balance? Do their work bring them satisfaction in their life? Are they happy? In Japan, the working class is miserable. They have worker rights on paper, but on paper only. Because and there's a whole nother live stream, a whole documentary you can do about this, about the work life in Japan, how companies force people to work unpaid overtime, how you're forced to go out to drink with your bosses. Like, it's a whole conversation about this, where that you are forced to put unpaid hours in. And they got a lot of things on the books that are easily circumvented because they are a corporate fascist culture. I want to cover the new prime minister of Japan. And isn't it interesting how, like, the liberal class, like Zoran Mamdani today, he called Nicolas Maduro a dictator. He called the president of Cuba a dictator. Like, they all buy the neocon lies about the United States enemies. But why don't Zoran Mamdani and Bernie Sanders, the people who repeat empire lies about their enemies, like Bernie Sanders will say Vladimir Putin is a tyrant and a thug. And they will say that China is an evil authoritarian state because they have one-party rule. Why don't they ever call out Japan, a country that had one-party fascist capitalist rule for 75 years? Isn't it interesting how Japan never takes any heat from the NATO progressive left? People like AOC, they praise the UK. They say, "Well, my model of socialism comes from the UK." Yeah. Like, that's shit like AOC would say. You would never hear AOC and Ro Khanna criticize the UK for plunging into fascism. The UK is arresting 34 people every day for stuff they post on social media. There's scenes of them arresting blind, disabled people for wearing Palestine action shirts. But if you was to ask the NATO left, they would never call the UK a fascist state. They would never call France and all these European-friendly countries fascist states, when they are nothing but puppet clients of the United States, where their people have no sovereignty. Here is Sanae Takaichi, the new prime minister, and she was like a mentee of Shinzo Abe, and she self-described herself as someone who is following a Margaret Thatcherite ideology. Just to give you a point of view of how absolutely cooked Japan is, here's Takaichi. Man, this is a very poor image, isn't it? Takaichi often cited Margaret Thatcher, the former British prime minister, as her role model.
Yeah, and my treasure. That's so funny.
Yeah, feel free to. I was just doing a quick presentation. Feel free to chime in anytime.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, I could talk about Japan. My book is actually. It's funny that you mentioned this because my book is being translated into Japanese, and I'm going to be writing a new preface for it soon. And part of the reason I think they liked the book, the people who are doing this translation, is because I describe the LDP. She is from the so-called Liberal Democratic Party. Japan's been a one-party state. And the LDP itself was founded with a massive slush fund that was funded, financed by the theft of platinum and diamonds and such from China, especially. That a Yakuza man who was made into a surrogate for the Japanese Navy and the army. Some people have said he had the rank of rear admiral, but then that's kind of disputed in Japan, so I don't really know. But at any rate, this guy, his name was Yoshio Kodama, and he founded the LDP. He was in jail as a Class A war criminal and should have been tried and probably hanged for his crimes against humanity, but instead, they let him out of jail, and he takes this huge slush fund of like $75 million or something like that, and it becomes the secret stash slush fund of the LDP, this new party, which is essentially a CIA party. It's a CIA creation. This guy Kodama was a hard right-wing guy, an ultra-fascist militarist, part of the Japanese empire up to that got defeated in World War II. But the U.S., just as in Europe, they don't execute all the Nazis, especially the guys who were like on the the lower levels, the technicians who were like murdering people and such. They employ them in different ways. So in Europe, you get Gladio, and with all these networks of mafiosi and big business people and ex-Nazis and Italian fascists and so on. And in Europe or in East Asia, you get the East Asian People's Anti-Communist League, right? And in Japan, one of the main figures of this anti-communist league is Kodama, the guy who founded the LDP, and it's just you have Meyer Lansky and his connections to Harry Truman and the Democrat Party and so on, right? In the U.S., this mobbed up party to a degree, and a mobbed up political class. But in Japan, it's similar. You have a kind of the oligarchs and the overworld of corporate power in Japan is married to the underworld of organized crime, and that was what fueled that empire. So it's very similar to the U.S., and then that's why they are able to become a puppet of this right-wing imperial project that the U.S. has embarked on after World War II. And not every president was really aware of all the details of all these things. It was kind of a policy that who really knows who was commanding it all, but they set up this right-wing infrastructure and political infrastructure around the world. And in Japan, it manifested in this one-party state, essentially, that was a puppet of the CIA and was extremely tied to organized crime and, right-wing crank networks. And so Japan has just been this, it's not been a sovereign country at all. It's been occupied essentially by the U.S., and this new prime minister seems to be an extreme example of it. It's like with her politics, she kind of reminds you of the Milei guy or whatever in Argentina.
That's perfect.
Where it's just like, these ideas have been discredited by now. In 2025, these people shouldn't be still getting elected. They're going to wreck their countries. And Japan is somehow stable despite all of the changes in the U.S. empire. But at some point, you have to think Japan might assert its own national interest as the U.S., as they are tied to a sinking ship, essentially, in the U.S.
So, I'm so glad that you did a lot of writing on Japan. I'm glad I have you for this segment. This is absolutely perfect. I think your analysis of Japan is spot on. And as an anti-capitalist, I find the metrics that the West uses to be hilariously deceptive. Like, I'm not a big fan of GDP growth and all that shit. That's the kind of stuff capitalists use. They say, "Oh my God, look at the GDP growth. Look at no. How is the working class doing? Yeah. Are people able to start a family? Or do people have a good work-life balance? Do their work bring them satisfaction in their life? Are they happy?" In Japan, the working class is miserable. They have worker rights on paper, but on paper only, because. And there's a whole nother live stream, a whole documentary you can do about this, about the work life in Japan, how companies force people to work unpaid overtime, how you're forced to go out to drink with your bosses. Like, it's a whole conversation about this, where that you are forced to put unpaid hours in. And they got a lot of things on the books that are easily circumvented because they are a corporate fascist culture. So instead of talking about GDP growth, I like to talk about this kind of stuff. Record numbers of young Japanese taking their own lives.
Yeah, and that's always, suicide is a big issue in Japan anyway. In Japanese culture, they've always had a sky high suicide rate in Japan, and I'm sure it's worse now because of the late capitalism.
And just same with South Korea. So when capitalists talk about economic indicators on what country is successful, why is this not something that you consider? Well, the amount of people who feel like they're so hopeless that they have no choice but to take their own lives. Right. Compared to China, for example, where opinion poll after opinion poll, there's so many polls where it shows that Chinese people are extremely optimistic about the future.
Right.
Shouldn't that be something that we should measure? Meanwhile, in America, how many doomsday conspiracy theory has existed just in our lifetime?
Right. They are all competing with, especially on the right, because they don't have a good analysis of capitalism. they want to come up with conspiracies, and I deal with conspiratorial statecraft, and I think it's important to understand how lawless the regime is and how it does resort, routinely to conspiratorial statecraft and clandestine, crimes, assassination, paramilitary operations, rigging elections, sexual blackmail, etc., etc. But it's the if you have an affinity for capitalism, or if it's part of your core belief system, then you need to blame a group. It might be the Jews, it might be the Illuminati, it might be the
Yeah, yeah,
Jesuits, it might be the globalists. The globalist is kind of the generic thing, which is just, if you understand these organizations, they're just manifestations of Western capitalism and Western imperialism.
absolutely, Aaron.
So this, uh, when what you're talking about in terms of how could we look at like what it's really like for people, you can look at human development indicators. What's the literacy rate? How many people are living, are homeless? How many people are unable to come up with $500 if there were an emergency? And
Yes,
all of these things are bad and getting worse in the U.S. And that's why people are hopeless. Whereas in China, even though the development has been uneven to a degree where the coastal cities have prospered more, it still is starting to filter more to the rest of the country, and in pretty much every region of China, life has improved for decades now. Whereas in the United States, we almost think that it's a natural part of human progress that, like, well, of course it can only get worse because that's all we've experienced. And so the idea that, like, oh yeah, we have smart people and we can use our intelligence and our political institutions to make life better for people, that's almost like some sort of pipe dream in the U.S. You're thinking, what? We know that's not going to happen. I mean, we're just defeated in this way. And I believe until this regime is forced to reckon with reality, and how it has basically lost and it can't really compete anymore on any kind of level playing field, and it's even losing its power advantage to make the playing field always uneven, and rig everything in its behalf, they're in for a real rude awakening, and I think they're already seeing it, and they've boxed themselves into a corner. I don't think they can win against Iran. I don't think they can win against Russia, and I don't think they
yeah.
can win against China. And if they do anything stupid, maybe they'll get the world blown up. But I don't see how they could prevail in wars against these other countries. You can't just take on the rest of the world. They needed to have a better way to accommodate the majority of human beings on the planet. Saying that you're going to rule the world forever and have a new American century and full spectrum dominance and global primacy and 1,000 military bases around the world, and everybody's going to only buy and sell things in dollars forever, and just bow down to the white west forever world. It's madness, and it's collapsing now.
I truly believe that these psychotic criminals in the ruling class are engaging in the flip the table strategy.
Yeah,
Remember when you
that's
was a
scary.
child?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because they're not talking about literally flipping a table. They're talking about nuking the world potentially, which is like, that's why you can't just give an angry, 10-year-old the button to launch nukes, because they might not make the best decisions. They're entitled and sometimes myopic and et cetera, et cetera, right? But that's like our ruling class. They're like spoiled children.
these motherfuckers rather ruined it for the entire world than live in a Chinese century. They
Or
tried
even
to
a
do
even
a
a even a human century. I think of it. I don't see China as wanting to just replace the U.S. and be like, haha,
yeah, I
now
understand.
instead of Hollywood, you're gonna get all these Chinese flavored movies, and everything's gonna be about buy Chinese cars, etc., etc. I just don't see them doing that. It's not in the history of the Chinese civilization, which taught Chinese history for 3 years. Taught the course 3 years as a high school course for seniors, and it had Japanese history in that too because it was East Asian. And I know these cultures fairly well. I've been to both of them. I've spent a fair amount of time in Japan, and I lived in Taiwan for a year, in China for a summer.
Based.
Americans have no clue. They have no understanding of what they're about to experience.
Yeah, and this is what I mean, because this is a perfect entryway to this, because we were talking about how the Japanese working class is suffering, and Japan is now remilitarizing the same way that Germany is remilitarizing. So we have Imperial Japan that is back, baby. Not Germany got their military back. and they all supporting genocide. It's like the good old days, isn't it? And instead of taking care of the Japanese working class, instead of learning the lessons that China, their cross the pond neighbor, is teaching them, they're instead engaging in militarism, cutting social spending to challenge China. This is the new prime minister, Sane Takaichi, has long been a poster child of the LDP's conservative wing, championing causes such as high government spending and a hawkish approach to China and a large defense budget. And I covered this last year. None of the dumb left, no one in the progressive left is talking about this kind of stuff. It's how Japan is remilitarizing. Why no criticism among the NATO left over the militarization of the West? Japan is on course to remilitarization. And this is what they plan to do. Her plan has nothing to do with increasing the quality of life for Japanese people. It's waging war against China. You guys see how she's just another Western puppet? And I think what you said was so on point when you explain how Japan is still colonized, they are occupied by the United States, which is why they've been implanted by this fascist rule.
And it's a tragedy too, because the Japanese would not have pursued the sort of fascistic imperialist course that they did in the latter part of the 19th century and up until World War II, when the U.S. just nuked them and said, no, we're the empire of the Pacific and you're not. I mean, which is really what that was about. They did that because the U.S., even before the Civil War in the U.S., so in the 1850s, they sail into Tokyo Bay and they force them to sign a treaty with trade for the U.S. They said they've got these gunboats and they're like, you're going to do business with us. You're not going to be isolated anymore. You're not allowed to be isolationist. You have to trade with the West. And so the Japanese said, well, this seems to be the way of the future. We're actually superior to these barbarians, but we need to copy their technology and their methods to some degree. And so they became like a copycat of Western imperialism. But it was really it was the West that kind of spurred them to do this. It was American imperialism that led them to think, well, we have to become our own militarist empire, and then we can do to East Asia what they've done around the world, and we'll be like a little mini empire, and we'll be better because we're Japanese, we're better. I mean, so there's definitely some like chauvinism there, but it's all they were copying the West first because they were the victims of Western imperialism and they didn't want to be, so they thought they would become strong, and then their empire fails because honestly the West wants to rule the East as well. The West wanted to be the U.S. especially wanted to be the hegemon. When Japan was taking over all those countries in East Asia, those were all colonies, like the Dutch East Indies, British Malaysia, Hong Kong, which was British, the U.S. controlled Philippines. These should not have been. They were attacking Western colonies. They weren't attacking indigenous people or whatever. They were actually just going after the colonial possessions, and they wanted to make them their own colonies. So this history is really wild, and it's just run its course. I just think that the world is ready for a post-imperial age of kind of cooperative internationalism. China is leading the way there, and I think that that's just the tide of the future. And this may be the last gasp of the LDP because how much longer can they keep up with this when the living standards of people and their precarity is just going to get worse, and it's going to be more obvious that the U.S. is not this benevolent world leader of freedom and prosperity that you want to be attached to.